We are going to get started in just a moment. Nice to see all of your names popping in. Welcome, everyone. Hello. Oh, hi, Miriam. So nice to see you. Welcome, everybody. Really nice to see everyone starting to trickle in. I am going to give us a little bit of brief housekeeping just to get us started here as we kick off this awesome session. Many of you have hung out with us before, so if you know the drill already, you can use this time to tell me in the chat, are you happy with how product managers and data scientists work together in your organization today? So in the chat, pop down there and let me know. Yes, no, maybe a little bit, sometimes. How do you feel about how product managers and data scientists work together in your organization today? And as you are entering those answers, you should do so in the chat box below. It's the one that's a little bit more to the left-hand side in your Zoom window. That's the best place for you to really hold back channel conversations, chat with your peers, swap ideas while Nick and Peter are guiding us through this session. Definitely make sure that you select everyone from the dropdown. Otherwise, when you enter a comment, it's really just me who can see those comments, and it makes me feel a little bit selfish for hogging all of your insights to myself. So make sure that you check everyone from the dropdown. If you've got questions for Nick and for Peter, there is going to be a QA on the back quarter of our time together. So you want to use that QA box down below further to the right during the session to log your questions. And I'm going to keep an eye on those and I will flag them for our experts. So definitely pop those in there. Finally, if you need to drop out of this session a tad early, we won't be offended, I promise. Or if you want to share these ideas with a peer, I think you have great taste. We have you covered. This session is being recorded and you are going to receive a copy in your inbox in the next coming days. So I am ready for the next slide, Peter, and that is it for housekeeping. We are moving right into our discussion of how you can empower collaboration between your data practitioners and your product managers. And I really love this conversation because Pragmatic has a really unique position and perspective on it because we're dedicated to partnering with organizations to create a shared language among their teams. And to do that, you need to approach all of your groups from many different directions. You can pop me right to the next slide. So we have a number of ways that we help do that. So our course, Data Science for Business Leaders, is really designed to support any team leader who wants to better leverage data in their strategic business development. Business-driven data analysis is a course that's really designed specifically for data professionals and those data professionals that want to make sure that the power of their insights are fully translating to the organization. Finally, Insight is a training session for product managers who want to partner with data folks to improve their product development process. And our entire learning ecosystem was created to bring alignment across your team and organization. I am ready for the next slide, please. And so today we are going to share a story of how Nick Karochnikov, the head of data science at ShipBob, and Peter Bradford, Pragmatic Institute's director of enterprise transformation, really forged a relationship between data practitioners and product management folks to create this really beautiful cross-functional team that skipped ahead of the competition. Nick is the head of data science at ShipBob. He's an incredibly accomplished data science leader in the space and has an extensive track record of developing artificial intelligence and machine learning solutions to really transform business processes. Peter is Pragmatic Institute's director of enterprise transformation, and he's really market focused, totally outcome driven, and a product leader who has over 20 years of experience growing profitable businesses. Nick and Peter know each other well. They worked together previously at IBM. And these two fellows are just brilliant professionals, really elevated practitioners of their respective crafts. So I cannot wait a second longer. I'm going to pass it right over to them. You are going to love hearing from them both. Nick, Peter, welcome, and thank you very much for joining us.
Pleasure.
Thank you so much, Georgina.
Take it away, Nick.
Thank you, Peter. So I think the data storytelling is very powerful. So let me just start by sharing a little story. So personally, I have a tremendous respect for Facebook research, as some of the world's most advanced AI, artificial intelligence, and machine learning algorithms came directly from the team. We use them on a daily basis. They're ranging from natural language processing to the most sophisticated big data-driven recommender systems. On the background, these algorithms enable the core functionality of the Meta products, from image recognition to the newsfeed recommendations that you'll see in your daily usage. So a lot of those algorithms are now open sourced, and data scientists across the globe are using them to do a variety of tasks, like detect objects and images, translate, summarize, generate text, build very intelligent conversational AI agents, and transcribe text from speech. However, the irony is that this simple scorecard and a presentation from the data science team to Meta's Chief Product Officer, Chris Cox, it drove perhaps the most pronounced shift in the company's strategy, ultimately leading to the renaming of Facebook to Meta. So what we can see from this leaked analysis, it demonstrated just one single fact, is that the teens and young adults are shifting away from Facebook and Instagram to alternative platforms like TikTok and Snapchat, and urgent actions are needed to maintain the growth. So to me, this portrays a quintessential partnership between the data science and product management teams. It enables the company to act rapidly on the data-driven insights. It can help adjust to the shifts in consumer preferences, maybe changes in competitive environment, macroeconomic pressures, recessionary pressures, geopolitical environments. But the bottom line is it does not have to be very sophisticated. It just has to be powerful enough to drive the change. So Peter, back to you.
That's great, Nick. Well, some of you don't know the backstory, but Nick and I, when we were at IBM, we were part of the enterprise transformation team working for the CFO. And we had this amazing opportunity to collaborate successfely on a project for the benefit of all the product development teams. We senior executives across our software, hardware, and services team wanted to surface best practices to drive their teams with speed and effectiveness, but they didn't want any investigations from our enterprise transformation teams slowing down the commercialization process. So we banded together, and the project involved benchmarking roughly $6 billion worth of spending and 45,000 people engaged in commercializing new technologies to significantly look at different approaches to innovation. The constraints that we not talk to the product development teams except to evaluate our final results ended up inspiring a much deeper collaboration of both systems of record that house the sanctioned and governed corporate data with systems of engagement that contain socially shared posts about work and jobs. And it also helped fuse my product management context-heavy mindset with a much more savvy and deep exploration of data embodied by the work and insights of Nick.
So let me say a few words. Think about, we have 45,000 developers, as Peter mentioned, $6 billion of spend. Now think about those people are describing their activity using a free-form text. And to add the complexity, a lot of those people came from hundreds of different acquisitions that IBM has made across the globe from a variety of startup technology companies, or even some more mature enterprises. So now our goal is to find how we can make software development more effective. And the way we wanted to approach it is by leverage the machine learning and natural language processing to standardize all of the jobs and tasks and measure really how much money, how much time we invest across each of those activities, because ultimately we wanted to learn from the best and apply to the rest. So if we move to the next page, thinking about those definitions, now that we standardized it, spending weeks and weeks and weeks of mining through hundreds of thousands of different pieces of text, how people describe their jobs on their personal pages, and their social media, like internal social media within IBM, we could start assessing the best practices. So we're running various simulations and comparisons between the most productive and the least productive teams. And on those dashboards, you can see some of the sneak previews of those. So we could provide actionable insights across a variety of dimensions. We looked at the team with high attrition, low attrition, teams that were very effective, and we'll be able to break down the team composition between most junior and senior resources, whether employees need to be co-located within the same geographical area or a time zone, and whether the most productive teams were the most compensated teams as well. And then the crown jewel on top of this, on the next page, we're actually able to protect the intellectual property behind this novel approach. We were able to file an invention disclosure, and we were actually granted a patent. So it was a good reward for us for all the hard work we spent on it.
And that was terrific. But of course, this is just one example of many more public collaborations going on in the industry between data science and product innovation. For example, at USAA, telematics enables the insurer to nudge customers to be better drivers by offering rebates on insurance premiums. And judging from the popularity of those programs across the insurance industry, many cost-conscious consumers see those programs as win-wins. You're probably familiar at Netflix. They built a strong and robust business model over many years around the recommendations based on views and reviews of movies. So if you have a subscription like Netflix or Amazon Prime Video, chances are you've been encouraged to watch a program based on their recommendation engine. Over time, these have become increasingly accurate, and they now drive, at least for Netflix, a 93% retention rate. Airbnb, similarly, is using A/B testing, image recognition, natural language processing to help improve their recommendations. All of these companies have really forged that data science into the experience of the product itself. And so by tailoring that content for an audience of one, they're driving these transaction rates higher. And that increases, at least in Airbnb's case, the commissions from the exchange that they've helped enable. You don't have to go too far from your daily activities if you're a product manager on the product team, though, to get value from data science. You can put data science to good use in service of things as fundamental as market problems, which we talk about all the time in pragmatic training. And as I did for a needs analysis that I did for a new hardware platform a decade ago, one of the questions the instructors report that is most often asked is, how many Nihito interviews do I need to do to cover the market? And that's actually been answered by market researchers. Abby Griffin and John Hauser, academic researchers in marketing science, found that new insights gathered tend to asymptotically taper off as you do more and more. So you get about 80% of the information from qualitative interviews with about, say, 14 to 16, and approaching around 90 to 95 with 25 to 30 discussions. Of course, the explorations should be about a specific problem or job to be done, but they're fairly robust numbers, at least based on the research. So we did qualitative interviews, and then, of course, like many of you, went on to quantitative. And so in order to prioritize requirements, in order to get a sense of what's pervasive and urgent, you can do a quantitative survey, and that's complementary to the qualitative gathering of needs, in that it helps you identify prioritizations, right? So with about 30, you can have a general sense of what the needs of a particular market are for your innovations. But in that case, at least at the sample of about 30, you're not allowing for significant variations in job role. And so often you're only identifying the high level opportunities, use cases that you typically find pretty well covered in some of the analyst recommendations, at least for the larger industry. So certainly feedback at this level is improving on what you got from the qualitative interview, but it's not something necessarily that'll create a long sustainable advantage. To do that, you can actually collect more responsive. And this is where I think data science comes into, or can come into, your market gathering your key problems and understanding your market. And in this case, we gathered roughly 235 individual responses, and you can do clustering analysis. So, for those of you that are less familiar with that, you identify patterns of responses across the data set. And by leveraging clustering analysis, you can identify groups that have more or less answered the survey in a similar way. And by doing so, you can identify needs-based segmentation or create needs-based segmentation and create a prioritized backlog for a specific market segment. And that enables you to, in this case, you can see, have much greater focus on a segment that offers sustainable differentiation, and you can create personas that help your entire product team focus on those individuals with specific needs. So product managers and data scientists are clearly birds of different feathers, but there's a lot of value in that collaboration. Nick, wouldn't you say so?
I think that outside of this Meta Facebook example that we shared, how often do we really see product management teams that are meeting with the data science on a cadence basis? And how many product managers are looking at those health scorecards the data scientist team putting in front of them? So I think that collaboration is critical. So now, if we think about traditional application of data science, and we kind of wanted to highlight some examples from different business functions, they are maybe a little bit more mature, right? For the human resources, we want to minimize the employee churn. We want to be able to really stop employee from churning a few seconds before they make their decisions by being able to proactively intercept the churn and maybe offering them better position, better compensation, better training. For the sales, it's very common. Obviously, sales organizations are all interested in how can we increase the revenues, how can we improve the coverage, how can we better identify prospective buyers and the right offering for those prospective buyers. For the marketing, it's what campaigns are most effective, how do we convert more leads, how do we identify the most effective communication and the right sequence for those communication. Do we first touch a prospect or a customer with maybe with a social media touch, then maybe direct mail, maybe the postcard, then a follow-up conversation. Now, for the legal, it's either minimize the likelihood of lawsuit, or maybe we want to identify companies who are infringing on our intellectual properties. For the finance, we don't want to default. We want to identify who is at risk of maybe skipping a payment to us. And for the support, I think today we see a lot more AI-driven support. The very basic idea behind support might be we want to prioritize the requests from a customer at risk. So let's say if you identify the customer with a high churn risk score, you want to be able to send them to your best, most proficient support group so they can take the best care. Maybe for the customers who have a very basic question, you use AI to automatically answer it. And then for everyone else, the rule supply. So I think those business functions have plenty of examples of existing data science solutions. But to me, the product managers are somehow missed from that page.
Well, I think all of those are kind of operationally focused, and Nick, maybe that the reason is because that there's an obvious ROI with some of those cost functions. It's if I kind of look at it from a product management perspective, it's not that product managers don't want that collaboration to happen. It's just that organizationally, I feel like they're on islands in many cases and separated. And so when I see product managers and product team members kind of leveraging analytics, it's usually the most creative way they can through the use of tools to help extend their expertise in areas where they don't really have a resource, a physical data scientist to interact with, and so tools like Amplitude, Mixpanel, Pendo, and Heap, they track user interactions, usage, visits, and specific events, and those provide descriptive analytics about user behavior, and they help identify specific pain points in the journey and then quantify the overall user experience. Of course, this is great for developing deeper insights into that journey, helping to improve the design of interfaces, understanding when the users are getting stuck, drive that engagement and further adoption with SaaS software in particular. But it doesn't necessarily lead to these greater gains that we're seeing the examples of functional product outcomes, prescriptive analysis, artificial intelligence, automation, or necessarily introduce new business models. So I think there's an opportunity for a new path, kind of this more direct product management to data science team collaboration to improve product innovations, kind of like the experience that we had many years ago working together. And it's going to require some movement on both sides. From the perspective of the overall model, it's no different than product innovation itself. There's many of you are probably familiar with the double diamond of innovations, where starting from articulated needs, you're going to first take that journey, that divergence and convergence from 0 to 1 to identify that specific valued innovation. In this case, we're creating an analytical insight. And so when, for example, Nick and I work together, that first proof of concept was very similar to what I engaged in with engineering teams, where we identified a capability a solution that we could deliver. In this case, a specific analytics insight. And then there's a little bit of divergence and convergence. Okay, how can we scale and productize this or make it work such that it's not going to cost us exorbitant amounts as we deploy it across the rest of the business. Ultimately, that requires, I think, product managers to become more data fluent, and data scientists, as I observed Nick, as he was developing in our collaboration, to become more savvy from a business acumen standpoint, better at storytelling, telling the story of the data in the context of the users. And so, that's certainly foundational. Bringing data scientists and closer collaboration with the product teams will help. So if you're not in charge of a formal program yourself, I think you can engage in informal exchanges. One of the occasions that I had to, as a product manager, engage with many data scientists was this data hackathon related to customer needs. And I thought that was really a valuable experience for both the data scientists and the product managers that joined that. was a lot of fun too. And then, you can develop structures and boundary artifacts that inspire that closer collaboration. So you can do, as a product manager, a data inventory. What data do you have, as you're creating your product roadmap, and you're thinking about the experiences that you're trying to create for your targeted user base? What are the fundamental questions that you have at each of those major stages? And what are the pieces of data that you have and don't have? Typically, when I observe transformations or breakthroughs in innovation, it's really about kind of pushing towards the data that, quite simply, you just don't have, or you don't know that you have. Pairing up with a data scientist, sharing that data inventory, sharing that product roadmap strategy, and your measurement challenges is a great way to engender, I think, some fantastic collaboration. So, as you think about the framework, the 37 boxes, there's plenty of areas that are ripe for collaboration that, with data, could be so much more rich and driven by market needs, and ultimately help you make better decisions. What I would say is, there's some areas where it's going to be heavy on you as the product team leader, you in a spreadsheet. On the flip side, there are some projects that the data science team is going to engage in, and they're going to be really outside the scope of new product creation. But there's probably a fair bit of common ground in the middle where there's an opportunity. It's not incredibly complex, but it's more than you can do with your spreadsheet. And with just a little bit of effort from your data science team, you could realize a tremendous win-win. What do you think, Nick?
So what I wanted to do, I wanted to start this page by maybe encouraging people to ask more questions. And I already saw one from Eric, and maybe I'll try to kind of cover the question as well as go through some of the things that are written on this page. So to me, the data is probably more readily available than you think. We do a lot of the social media mining. We do a lot of the voice of customer through a variety of NPS scores. And you personally, when I first started, I was surprised how many data points we can collect from just publicly available sources. There are places like G2, I think used to be called G2 Crowd. There are product review boards. There are social media and open Facebook pages. There are all of the consumer reports. So I think, to me, it's there are scrappy ways to engage with your customer base and collect what they have already provided. They might be a little bit biased, but I think that data is infinitely better than no data at all. So now, if I think about those project ideas for the existing project, for the existing product, collecting those health scorecards, I think the critical piece here is it's not enough to just take the number. So let's say your customers might be rating you as all 5, but what does it really mean? In my professional history, I worked on a project where we were collecting the customer satisfaction reviews from the customer briefing centers. And most of them were rated as 5s or 4s. So customers were happy. And what the briefing management team decided to do, they said, look, we're not going to bother reading through the comments that have 5s or 4s. They're all pleased, right? What are we going to change? But when we opened up the scan of worms and started running some natural language processing algorithms through this data, we found out that a lot of the comments would say the meeting facility was fantastic. The chairs were comfortable. The food was delicious. The drinks were plentiful, but your presenters were god's awful, right? So like, wow, because they felt that they're rating the facility, they're not rating the content. So like those things are extremely valuable. And so to me, if I look at the brand health scorecard, it's always a combination of multiple data dimension. Is what you're hearing internally from your stakeholders, what are you getting as the kind of financial results, product usage, product engagement, obviously the revenue data, profitability data, but all of the data you collect from the kind of external places by reading and listening and feeding the results for the social media are absolutely critical. So now the market need for the new product. So I think that's a lot more difficult because it's easier to say what is your product doing versus to try to estimate what would your product have done if I were to create it. So there's a lot more conceptual analysis we'll have to go, but maybe we can do some cluster analysis on the needs of our stakeholders, various personas, a lot of the public opinion mining. One more time, the data is really available on a lot of different outlets, B2B or social media outlets, competitive intelligence. So for example, if you're thinking about creating a new product, maybe the first thing is to go and collect the data from your competitors' offering. Maybe there are a lot of the customers who like certain features and functions and totally can stand the other features and functions. So that's an opportunity to collect this data and create a better offering. So then forecasting and the projections. So right now, I think everyone is asking a question. So what is going to happen by the end of the year? Are we going to be in a recession? Where the market is going to be? And honestly, if I could tell you what's going to be the price of S&P 500 6 months from now, I would never have to work again. But we still have enough data to be able to estimate something and be able to at least create the simulation scenarios, right? If consumer confidence shrinks by 5%, that's what's going to happen to our revenue and profitability. So I think having some at least high-level simulation capabilities are critical for you to make more future-proof decisions, right? You can say we're going to hunker down. We're going to cut 20% of our staff and we're going to weather the storm. Or you might say it's an opportunity for us. We believe that if we continue investing over the next 12 months while the rest of the competition is completely cutting the spending, we're going to come so much stronger because we'll have capabilities A, B, and C that the rest of the companies will simply not have. And we're going to crush the competition. And then the last piece is the customer engagement. I cannot tell enough about how important it is to set up those insights from the get-go. So getting those NPS scores, getting customer reviews, sending them some results, and then analyzing them. So my favorite example is every time I would get a survey from for example, internet cable provider, I've never rated them more than 0, but they've never acted on any of the insights that they provided. So like, what's the point? They're collecting the data, obviously they're not acting on it. So if you choose to get this information from your customers, make sure that you have a team that is at least acting on those insights. And if they're saying they did not receive the right answer, if they needed additional help, if they rated you highly on certain elements, let's say maybe the customer service rep was very friendly but didn't know how to provide a certain capability, let's follow up, let's engage with those customers. And I think it does miracles. It improves the engagement, it improves the product usage, it reduces the customer churn, and it gives you so much more visibility into what customers are doing with your product.
That's awesome. Thanks, Nick.
Those are some really great suggestions, and I think that absolutely does answer the question that Eric had for us, and give a couple examples and ideas. This is a good time for others on the call to add questions for Nick and Peter. A couple of you did send me questions already, but the Q&A box is the best place for you to pop those. So I encourage you to use this opportunity to get some hands-on advice and ideas from these two brilliant fellows. So pop those into the Q&A box now. I have a question that I'd like to start with here. That is really about how to start, right? People are like, yes, I definitely want to do this. It's a priority internally for us to create really strong relationships between product and data, but they really need a greater understanding of, first of all, what the data folks do, what they need from product, and vice versa. So really creating that understanding. as someone is just on the beginning of this journey, what are some suggestions that you have for them to really introduce product and data teams to one another and say, this is what we do and what we need, and this is what we do and what we need? Peter, do you have suggestions about that?
Yeah, I'm of course more interested in what Nick has to say, but from a product standpoint, I think it's not such a bad thing to just kind of do to canvas the role, to talk, even within a business, what I find is there's variation in terms of what people are doing, so you can share a day in the life, and what I would encourage is, kind of an informal exchange, take a data scientist to lunch, become interested in what they're doing. And I think the more interest that you display and interest in common humanity that you display in reaching out, you can really get into some rich conversations, but it starts with the relationship. And part of that, I think, is enabled by having a better understanding of the data scientist's world. And so, if you just research or understand a few more of the terms of art and their world, you'll be able to, without interrupting them, listen to what they're working on, and even be able to kind of ask intelligent second order questions. Yeah. What do you think, Nick?
So I think what you said, I think inviting the data scientists to your next team meeting and let them, the first 30 minutes, let them listen what you do. And for the next 30 minutes, ask them to think and share their opinion, what they can do to help you out. So I know in a lot of the organizations, if you have an existing data science team, they might be very technical, and they people who might be lacking the business understanding and visibility into the product that the product team offers. So I think it's a partnership. Inviting data scientists for lunch or buying them a drink, I think, is a sure thing, a sure way to develop this collaboration. If you work in a remote environment, buy them a virtual coffee or tea gift card, maybe. I think the bottom line is data scientists want to help. They want to gain business knowledge. They want to gain business understanding. They want to make sure their work is impactful, because the last thing you like as a data scientist, the most demotivating thing is what we call creating the shelfware, building things that are sitting on the shelf collecting dust. And for us to make sure that what we build is actionable is exactly the collaboration with the product team. The product team knows maybe they evaluating some possibilities, they're thinking about what features, functions the customers would want, what product to deprecate, what product to bring to market, what can you guys do? And of course, in every organization, everyone is overworked and underpaid. But I'm sure it's all a matter of prioritization, making sure that the business understands that we can only be successful as our product portfolio is. And then you guys have a direct dotted line to the product team, helping them understand how to prioritize. I think that's critical. I'm delighted to come to the product managers meeting because I learn about like what is coming this year, what is coming next year, how the project portfolio looking, what are the trade-offs. And I think being able to provide this eyes and ears, and even going back to the very simple product health scorecard, and Facebook's examples, I think that's critical. Enabling product managers to make those data-driven decisions is absolutely critical.
Yeah, absolutely. There's another question that is similar to some of the points that you touched on, Nick, in really, but looking at it from the perspective of a leader of the organization or of the team, and how can you really ensure that the product managers are taking the necessary time to loop in the data folks at the beginning of a project, right? If the product folks are the ones that are driving a new project, our question asker says that sometimes they feel as if their product managers will spend a long time working on a feature release and then loop in the analytics team at the very end saying, can I have some data here?
Yeah, to me, this is just indicative of the relationship that product used to have with the engineering team, back in the days of waterfall, right? We need to think of data scientists. This is just, my humble opinion, but I think we need to think of our data science team much like we think of the engineering team today. They need to be brought into that collaboration early on as, co-collaborators in understanding and developing insights about, the problem and the way in which we solve that problem, the 0 to 1 innovation creation, as opposed to just at the back half productizing or being farther downstream. And I think by doing that, we'll bring a lot more of those insights forward. I know, for example, by talking with Nick early on, I learned some things, data resources that I had no clue about. And he knew ways of analyzing those data resources that transformed what was, a confusing and quite overwhelming mass of data into something that we could translate into something insightful, a plank, if you will, that brought in logic that really transformed how we solved a particular problem that we shared. So I think it's just about being invitational. I don't know, Nick, any other things to add there?
I might add just a little touch on this. I think the problem we're facing frequently is that the data science teams are brought up to fix the issue once it's about to fail. I think we need to turn the tables, and product managers should be making the decisions on priorities using the data and not the gut feel. I've heard from one of the product managers that it's more important to feel that you are right than actually be right. Because if you feel you're right, you're going to make you're going to follow your strategy no matter what. So I personally would not support that position. I think being able to, and I cannot think of any organization, even the multi-billion-dollar businesses, that would have infinite amount of financial needs, right? So you always have to prioritize. You have to develop things that make most sense. So how do you make those decisions? And if the product team says that unless we understand the metrics you mean financial driven, usability driven, market driven, competitive driven, unless you have the number, and the number probably will come from your collaboration with the data team or data science team, I think your gut feel is not serving you very well. So I think we want to be partnering with the product organization, but we want to be brought to the table at the day zero and not when it's too late.
Yeah.
I was just going to add one thing. I having said that, I think there are, because of the frequency and the timing of decisions, Nick, I think there's different logic that can be applied. There's deductive. When you have all the perfect information, you can, follow the consequence of that. There's inductive, trying to see the relationship. And then there's abductive, which is kind of like hypothesizing a relationship based on the evidence that's presented at the time. And I think, a lot of times, given the time constraints that our product managers and product team members are under, sometimes you just have to make the best decision with the best data that you have at the time. And I think you would support that too if you were in close collaboration. It's kind of like working together. As long as we have, we've made the decision on the best information we have today, we can continue to iterate and get better later, but we're going to move forward. Yeah.
You will never have 100% of the data, never. So you will need to make a decision with uncertainty, and that uncertainty might be 20%, it might be 50%, but you still are certain that the other half of the decision is based on material data.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that we have teased through some really interesting perspectives and valuable perspectives about where the relationship should begin. There are two questions here about kind of the more formal structure of either those relationships or teams themselves. So thinking about, what are some of the best team structures that either of you have seen for product and data working together? What do those team dynamics look like?
If I were to answer maybe Nathaniel's question directly about whether it makes sense to place the data scientists within a product management team or rely more on a centralized data science function, I think it depends a lot on your team. So I've seen both approaches work very successfully. If you have a centralized data science function and one of the missions is to support the product, I think it's a little bit easier because, let's say, some skill set might be required to do like computer vision, some skills for natural language processing, some skills for customer attrition prevention. So to me, the centralized data science team will have a lot of sense because they might be able to pull through the resources to provide the support. But in certain companies, it's working across organizational boundaries is difficult. And you always get kind of this cold shoulder. And for those types of organization, I think having a function within a business probably would be justified. So, and as I said, it works both ways. There are some companies that prefer this centers of excellence, where everything is centralized. There are other functions. I think Amazon has been known for it with the STO, STL, single-threaded ownership, single-threaded leadership organizations. The data scientists are embedded in each of the STLs. So to me, that's it's an organizational decision, and either of them can be very successful. Anything from you, Peter?
No, I think that was exhaustive. I'm not going to add anything value add beyond that. That was great. Thanks, Nick.
There's a question from Ganesh who's asking about really motivating an organization to have the data mentality. And then there were also a number of folks at the beginning of the call describing their relationship in their organizations between product and data, saying that there is a top-down mentality that's saying we value the data mindset, but the actual day-to-day relationships are not necessarily expressing themselves in that way. So, on one hand, there's an organizational culture of data collaboration, but the personal relationships are still underdeveloped. And then on the other hand, sometimes you do have strong working relationships, but that kind of data mentality, as Ganesh says, isn't there. Can you talk a little bit about each of these challenges and scenarios and how coming together might look different depending on the situation?
I think Ganesh's question is probably one of the most difficult problems because investing in the data is actually a significant financial constraint, right? It's even if you have perfect data today and you don't maintain it, in about 5 years, it becomes obsolete. So being able to build the use case and follow through this use case to continuously invest in upkeeping the high quality data that will enable data scientists and will drive the right product decisions is a budgetary item that needs to be in every single organizational plan. Do I have a hack through this? Can we say, well, no, we're not going to develop and invest in our data, we'll find alternative means? I think the answer to this is no. So this has to be there has to be visibility across the leadership and investment in the data, in a high quality data. I don't think there is any way to bypass it.
I've always believed that there's tops down leadership and then there's bottoms up influence, right? And I think cultural transformations and refocusing a team on kind of data driven insights can happen at both levels. At some point in your career, I think you come to this point where you realize that the culture of an organization is is partially your beliefs about the culture. And so I really do believe that everyone can, have a dramatic influence on the leadership team, whether or not they're in leadership, by simply living that passion that you have for data. And what I would say from a product management side is just be very clear about the uncertainties that you have. One of I think the biggest challenge is particularly for people that have been a part of organizations a long time, is understanding where their assumptions lie. And so you really have to be circumspect about the assumptions that you're making about the marketplace, about the solutions that you're bringing. And, there's no better way of, I think, kind of punching holes in your assumptions, or at least developing clarity, than kind of looking at data, being refreshed by, that user feedback and other insights, and then becoming very clear about the questions that you want to ask. It's one thing to inspire the collaboration. It's quite another to ask a question that ultimately, you don't have necessarily an action that you're going to take. And so I think sometimes beginning with the end in mind can help you become even more data driven. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, as we're wrapping up, I have one kind of fun question. Recommended books for product teams that are starting to dig into data insights. Nick, do you have a book that you would suggest that people take a look at as they're just starting to get more familiar?
I do not, unfortunately, off the top of my head. I'll have to think about it.
Sure. Any ideas, Peter? I know we're putting you on the spot.
I have a few. I really like a book by Douglas Hubbard, How to Measure Anything, because like the title says, there's probably if you can think about a business problem, probably the most transformative things for your customers as well as internal operational practices are around things that you don't have measures for. And so, it's if you think with the mindset that Doug recommends in that book, I think that will inspire this collaboration with data scientists and equip you to kind of move in the direction of a data-driven practice. So that would be the one that comes straight to the fore.
Awesome. Thank you. All right, closing question. It'll be the same for both of you from two different angles. Peter, if there was one thing that product folks on this call would do once we wrap up here, what would you suggest that they do? And same question will come to you after Nick from the data perspective.
I think, the best thing that they can do is take an inventory. It's kind of like every once in a while, I think I try to think unconstrained in order to really have, through that exploration, some type of breakthrough insight. And so if you could have any measure to improve the business, to inspire the next innovation, what would it be? And don't just come up with one, come up with a list and use that as a collaborative document to inspire that collaboration with data-driven practitioners and your extended product team. Maybe that's a little impractical, but I think that certainly that would enable you to really transform your practice and what you're doing. So anyways, that's the one that came to mind.
Love it. What about you, Nick?
I'd say go set up this lunch meeting with the data science team.
Yeah.
Very practical. Excellent.
Perfect. Perfect. Thank you both so much for your time and your insights. There's already tons of kudos pouring into the chat for both of you. Really appreciate your generosity of spirit and knowledge that you shared with all of us today. Thank you very much for walking us through this.
It's been a pleasure, especially working with Nick again. Thanks, Nick.
Thanks for the opportunity, Peter.
Wonderful.
Sure,
thank you, Nick. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. We will catch you next time. You will all receive a recording of this session in the next coming days. So have a wonderful rest of the morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you're tuning in from. Bye, guys.